A police officer kicked a pregnant woman, but he fell to his knees when he found out who her husband was.
Hello everyone, enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
In the rearview mirror, Monica noticed flashing lights. A police car was right behind her. A knot tightened in her stomach. She wasn't speeding, and she knew her taillights were working fine. Why was she being pulled over? Monica took a deep breath and slowly pulled over to the side of the road, trying to calm herself. As a black woman, Monica had heard too many stories about encounters with the police that went horribly wrong. Her husband, Gabriel Lopez, had chosen a career dedicated to defending those who had suffered from police brutality. Monica thought back to the stories he had shared with her over dinner: people hurt, families torn apart by a single moment of injustice. Now, she found herself in one of those terrifying situations. Her heart raced as she saw the officer, a white man with a stern, cold face, approaching her car. He walked with an air of arrogance, one hand resting on his holster. On his uniform, the name, Sanders, was embroidered. But what caught Monica's attention most was his attitude, the way he looked at her, the way his eyes narrowed as though he had already judged her. He looked at her like a threat, not a human being. Monica rolled down her window just enough to hear him clearly. "License and registration," he barked, skipping any courtesy or polite greeting. His tone was harsh, his face devoid of kindness. Monica's hands trembled as she reached for her purse to retrieve her documents. She felt her baby kick forcefully, a stark reminder of her vulnerability in this moment. She handed him her license and registration without saying a word, hoping that staying silent would keep things from escalating. Sanders snatched the documents without even glancing at them, his eyes still fixed on her through the car window. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice filled with suspicion. Monica blinked in confusion. "I just came from a doctor's appointment. I'm on my way home," she explained, her voice soft but steady. She tried to stay calm, but her heart was pounding. Sanders didn't seem to care. He stared at her with narrowed eyes, as if waiting for her to slip up, giving him an excuse to escalate the situation. An oppressive silence hung in the air as he continued to scrutinize her, and Monica felt her throat tighten. Something was wrong. "Got anything in the car?" Sanders asked abruptly, his tone icy. "Drugs, weapons?" He leaned closer, his face moving nearer to the window. Monica's heart seemed to stop. "No, officer, I don't have anything like that," she replied, her hands now gripping the steering wheel tightly. This wasn't a normal traffic stop. He was treating her like a criminal for no reason. Monica tried to keep her voice calm, but fear was creeping into every word. She didn't know how to handle this, whether to remain silent or stand up for herself. Sanders still wasn't satisfied. "Step out of the car," he demanded, taking a step back. Monica's stomach churned. She hadn't done anything wrong. Why was he asking her to get out of the car? "Officer, is there a reason?" she asked cautiously, trying not to sound confrontational, though fear gripped her. She glanced around, hoping someone would notice what was happening, hoping for a witness. But there were no cars on this road, no pedestrians passing by. Sanders' patience seemed to snap. He slammed his hand on the roof of the car, his voice filled with anger. "I said get out of the car now." His face twisted in rage, and Monica felt the full weight of the situation pressing down on her. This wasn't just a traffic stop, it was something far darker. With trembling hands, Monica slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the car door open. She moved slowly, her large belly making it difficult to act quickly. But Sanders gave her no time. As soon as her foot touched the ground, before she could even stand upright, she felt a brutal, merciless kick to her side. Monica screamed in pain as she collapsed to the ground, clutching her stomach. The impact left her breathless, and in that horrifying moment, all she could think about was the baby inside her. The kick had landed dangerously close to her belly, and she could barely breathe. What had just happened? Why would he do this? She looked up at Sanders in shock, her vision blurred by the tears streaming down her face. Sanders stood over her, tall and imposing, his expression cold and emotionless. "Stay down," he growled, as if she were the one at fault, as if she had done something to deserve this. Monica struggled to breathe, her hands instinctively cradling her stomach, desperately trying to feel any movement, any sign that the baby was okay. Her mind raced, overwhelmed by a million thoughts. How could this happen? How could he attack a pregnant woman without cause? She had heard about things like this happening to others, but in her worst nightmare, she never imagined it would happen to her. Lying on the ground, Monica's thoughts turned to Gabriel. Gabriel, her husband, who had fought tirelessly against people like Sanders. He had taken on countless cases, standing up for those who had been treated unjustly by the very system that was supposed to protect them. And now, she had become a victim of that same abuse. Would she even make it home to tell him what had happened? The world around Monica felt distant, as if she were floating in a haze of shock and pain. The sound of her own heartbeat thundered in her ears as she tried to steady herself, to think clearly. What should she do? What could she do? She needed help. She needed someone to see this, someone to stop this man before things got worse. But there was no one. No witnesses. Just her and this racist police officer, who had shown he had no hesitation in hurting her. Monica's phone was still in the car. If she could reach it, she could call Gabriel. He would know what to do, he always did. But could she move without making things worse? Sanders stood over her, breathing heavily, his hand still resting on his holster as if waiting for her to make a wrong move. The power was clearly in his hands, he believed he could do whatever he wanted to her, and no one would care. But he didn't know. He didn't know who her husband was. He didn't know what kind of man Gabriel was, or that Gabriel would stop at nothing to protect his family. Sanders had no idea that the woman he had just kicked had a husband who would relentlessly seek justice, and that ignorance was his greatest mistake, a mistake that would cost him everything. The world seemed to pause in that moment, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on Monica like a crushing force. But deep inside, she felt something stronger than fear, something that had always been there, hidden beneath the layers of terror and pain, determination. She wasn't going to let this end like this, not today. Monica could still vividly feel the officer's brutal kick as she sat in her living room that evening, replaying the horrifying event in her mind. It felt like a nightmare, impossible to believe that a simple trip to the grocery store had turned into something so horrific. The cold ground beneath her body, the sharp pain in her side, and the mocking sneer of the officer were etched into her memory. But what hurt more than the physical pain was the feeling of helplessness. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet she was treated like a criminal. Why? Because of the color of her skin. The evening was quiet, the only sound being the ticking of the wall clock. Monica glanced at it absently, realizing she had been home for hours and still hadn't told Gabriel what had happened. She didn't know where to start. Gabriel had been in court all day, fighting to expose injustices, and now she sat here, in the middle of her own nightmare. She didn't know how he would react, how to explain that she had been attacked not just by anyone, but by a white police officer, the kind of injustice he fought against tirelessly. She winced as she shifted on the couch, the aching pain in her abdomen a constant reminder of the brutality she had endured. Her hand rested on her belly, cradling the child she carried, and a wave of profound emotion swept over her. What if the baby had been hurt? During the attack, she had been too frightened to think about it, but now that fear consumed her. She could still hear the officer's voice echoing in her mind, ordering her out of the car, his tone filled with impatience and authority. "Step out of the car," he had shouted, offering no explanation. She had tried to remain calm, tried to explain that she was pregnant and had done nothing wrong, but he didn't care. All he saw was a black woman who hadn't obeyed quickly enough, and before she even understood what was happening, she was on the ground while he walked away as if nothing had happened. Monica's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Gabriel. I'm on my way home. Long day. I love you. Her heart pounded in her chest as she read the message. How could she tell him what had happened? She looked toward the front door, half expecting him to walk in at any moment, his strong presence filling the room. Gabriel had always been the one to make her feel safe. He was the fighter in their relationship, the one who stood up to those in power, and he did so with a calm, methodical resolve. But today, the fight had come right to their doorstep, and today it had knocked her down literally. Suddenly, Monica's phone buzzed again. This time it was a video link from Lisa, her best friend, with the message. Is this you? Monica's stomach tightened as she clicked on the link. The video started playing immediately, the shaky footage clearly recorded on someone's phone, but she recognized the scene instantly. The camera was pointed at her car, and she could see herself stepping out, her face a mixture of confusion and fear. Moments later, the officer Sanders shoved her to the ground. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched herself fall helplessly, clutching her stomach as she hit the pavement. The video wasn't long, but it captured everything. It was enough for the world to see what had happened. Enough to document the moment a white officer, drunk with power, used unnecessary violence against a pregnant black woman for no reason. She could hear the whispers of those filming, their shocked gasps as Sanders' kick landed on her side. This is insane, someone muttered. She didn't do anything. Monica's fingers hovered over the screen as the video ended. She felt numb. Everything was laid bare in every pixel and sound, the attack, the racial prejudice, the complete disregard for her humanity. It had all been caught on camera, and now the world could see it too. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Lisa. I'm so sorry this happened to you. People are sharing it everywhere. We've got your back, Monica. Behind her, Monica's mind reeled as the reality of the situation set in. People were seeing this. Strangers were watching the moment she was attacked, and they were taking sides. Some, like Lisa, would undoubtedly support her, but others, what would they say? Monica knew how these things played out. She had seen it happen before with other black victims of police violence. There would be those who blamed her, who claimed she must have done something wrong, that she hadn't followed the officer's orders quickly enough. They would try to justify what had happened to her. They always did. But there was no justification this time, there couldn't be. Not with her. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't. She wasn't doing anything but driving down the road, and yet here she was. The front door creaked open softly, and Monica looked up to see Gabriel standing in the doorway, his briefcase in hand, his eyes fixed on her face. He could sense something was wrong immediately, the tension in the air, the heaviness in her demeanor. Monica, he asked gently, stepping closer. What happened? Her throat tightened as she struggled to find the words. She didn't want to break down, didn't want to add to the burden he was already carrying, but the moment she saw the concern in his eyes, the emotional dam broke. He kicked me, she whispered, her voice trembling. Gabriel's face tensed. Who kicked you? A police officer, she replied, tears starting to blur her vision. Today, I was just driving, and he pulled me over, and then he kicked me. Gabriel's hand dropped the briefcase to the floor as he quickly moved to her side. His hands gently cupped her face, his eyes full of concern. Monica, are you hurt? Is the baby okay? I think so, she said, her voice breaking. But I'm scared, Gabriel. It happened so fast, and I couldn't stop it. Gabriel's jaw clenched, and she could see the anger rising in his normally calm demeanor. He was furious, and rightfully so. Monica had seen him angry before, but this was different. This time, it was personal. Who was the officer? He asked, his voice low and heavy. I don't know his name, she admitted. But there's a video. People recorded it. I just saw it. She handed him her phone, the video already queued up. Gabriel watched the video in silence, his face growing tighter with each passing second. When it ended, he exhaled slowly, controlled, but she could see it took every ounce of strength he had not to explode. "This is why we fight," he finally said, his voice trembling with rage. This right here is why I go to court every day. But, Monica, this time, it happened to you. To our family." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop him." Gabriel pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the protective fury burning within him. This wasn't just about the work he did anymore, it was about protecting his wife, his unborn child, from a world that seemed not to care about their lives. "We will fight," he said, his voice a mix of pain and determination. "We will make him answer for this." Monica gently pulled back, her eyes searching his. "But what if it's not enough? What if he gets away with it, like they always do?" Gabriel shook his head. "Not this time. Not with you. Not with our family." Monica's phone buzzed again, this time with more messages from friends and strangers. She hadn't even realized how quickly the video was spreading. In just a few hours, it seemed the entire world was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. As Gabriel glanced down at the messages, his mind was already calculating. The pieces were falling into place. This was the biggest fight of his life, and now it was personal. He wasn't just fighting for justice in theory anymore, he was fighting for Monica, for their unborn child, and for countless others who had faced the same violence and discrimination. He wasn't going to let Officer Sanders walk away unscathed, and Monica knew deep down that Gabriel would do everything in his power to ensure justice was served. The neighborhood was abuzz with shock and outrage. The video of Monica being kicked by Officer Sanders had gone viral, shared thousands of times within hours. It was difficult to watch and even harder to believe that something so brutal could happen in their community. The video showed Monica trying to stand, clutching her belly as the officer stood by, offering no help. People were horrified, but not surprised. Many in the black community had seen officers treat them like this before, but now there was evidence, and this time it felt different. The video began with the sound of a car door opening and Officer Sanders' harsh voice shouting at Monica. "Step out of the car," he yelled. The shaky footage, taken from a nearby witness's phone, zoomed in on Monica's frightened face. She wasn't resisting, not even arguing, she was simply trying to explain that she was pregnant and needed to move slowly. Her hands trembled as she opened the car door, and that's when the kick came. The camera shook as gasps echoed from the onlookers. It only took a few seconds for the video to show what happened, but those few seconds left a deep impression. Comments flooded every post featuring the video. "This is disgusting. How does this still happen? Justice for Monica." Some demanded the officer be fired, while others called for his arrest. As the video spread, it wasn't just the local community watching anymore, local news stations began broadcasting it, and soon it appeared on TV screens across the state. This couldn't be ignored. But while most viewers were shocked by what they saw, there were still those who tried to defend Officer Sanders. They claimed Monica must have done something wrong to provoke the officer's reaction. Others argued that she should have complied with his orders faster, as though being kicked was somehow her fault. To the black community, though, this wasn't about compliance, it was yet another example of a white officer abusing his power over a black person. They didn't need more proof of the systemic racism embedded in law enforcement, they had lived it. Now, with Monica's assault captured on camera, they hoped this could be a turning point. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Outside the police station, a small group of people began to gather. At first, it was just a few of Monica's neighbors, people who had known her for years and understood her kindness and compassionate heart. They held signs with her name, demanding that Officer Sanders be held accountable. "Justice for Monica," they chanted, while passing cars honked in support. As time went on, more and more people joined the protest. Soon, the crowd spilled into the streets. Families arrived, bringing their children, holding banners, and chanting for justice. Community leaders also appeared, speaking out against the officers' actions and the deep-seated racism within the police force. They had stood in this very spot before, fighting for justice in a system seemingly determined to deny their rights. Meanwhile, inside the police station, Officer Sanders sat at his desk scrolling through his phone. He had also seen the video, but he didn't seem worried. He had been on the force for over 10 years and had seen complaints like this come and go. The police union always had his back, and his colleagues typically dismissed accusations of excessive force as just part of the job. He didn't see himself as racist, just someone doing what needed to be done. But this time was different, and even Sanders could sense the shift. The attention this incident was garnering was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The protest outside grew louder, and people were demanding answers. For the first time in his career, Sanders began to wonder if he had gone too far. Yet, he still felt no remorse. He had acted on instinct, his instinct, and in his mind, that instinct had never failed him. Monica's slow reaction, her delayed compliance with his orders, was enough for Sanders. But what he hadn't realized was that Monica wasn't someone who would easily be silenced by the system, and soon, he was about to find out why. As the sun set and darkness fell, the protest outside the station didn't wane, instead, it grew stronger. People held candles, their faces illuminated by the soft glow, and they chanted Monica's name into the night. News crews arrived, setting up cameras and interviewing community members who spoke passionately about the injustice they had witnessed. The footage of the assault played over and over again, silent yet haunting on local news broadcasts. "We can't let this go," a woman told a reporter, her voice trembling with emotion. "That could have been my daughter, my sister. We're tired of being treated like this, and we won't stop until we get justice." In the heart of the crowd, an older man stood quietly, observing the protest with a heavy heart. Mr. Jackson, a longtime resident of the neighborhood, had seen things like this happen far too many times in his 60 years. He had witnessed how the police treated his community with suspicion, fear, and too often, violence. But he had also seen how the police quickly rallied to protect their own, leaving the victims to deal with the aftermath alone. He sighed as he took in the scene before him. He knew this fight wouldn't be easy, but something about the atmosphere this time felt different. Perhaps it was the number of people who had come to support Monica, or maybe it was the clarity of the video, undeniable and stark. Or perhaps it was because this time, the entire community seemed united in their demand for justice. Across town, in a quiet hospital room, Monica lay in bed, recovering from the shock of the assault. Her abdomen ached, and the doctors had advised her to rest, but her mind was racing. She had watched the video. She had seen herself fall, seen the look on Officer Sanders' face as he kicked her without hesitation. It wasn't just the physical pain that hurt, it was the way she had been treated. The way he had looked at her as though she was worthless. But Monica wasn't worthless, and her husband, Gabriel, was determined to let the world know it. Sitting beside her bed, he held her hand tightly, his mind already calculating legal strategies. He knew how these cases played out, how the system was designed to protect officers like Sanders. But this time, he wouldn't let that happen, not to his wife. Outside, the protest continued to swell, and as more people joined the movement, the pressure on the police department intensified. Calls from local politicians, community leaders, and even celebrities who had seen the video poured in, all expressing outrage over what had happened. The demands for justice grew louder, and it became clear that this incident would not quietly fade away. Officer Sanders, still sitting at his desk, began to feel the walls closing in around him. The chants from the protesters outside grew louder with each passing hour. Even his colleagues had stopped making light of the situation. They, too, had seen the video and knew things were about to get serious. Some had even started distancing themselves from Sanders, aware that he was becoming the center of a storm unlike anything they had faced before. By morning, the crowd outside the station had grown to hundreds of people, their signs and chants serving as a stark reminder that this time, the community would not back down. The pressure on the police department to take action mounted, and rumors began circulating that something would have to give. The question on everyone's mind was the same: would Officer Sanders finally face consequences for his actions? As the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the city, the world watched and waited. Gabriel was busy with another day at the courthouse, flipping through papers and jotting down notes for his next case. It was one of those long, grueling days, and he hadn't even had a chance to check his phone. His work as a civil rights attorney often felt like swimming against the tide, fighting injustice in a system that seemed unwilling to change. But it was his passion, and he couldn't imagine doing anything else. The case Gabriel was working on that day involved a young man wrongfully arrested, and as always, he was entirely focused on preparing his arguments. He was in his element, sharp, concentrated, and ready when his phone buzzed. At first, he ignored it, as there were always distractions, and the trial was about to resume. But then it buzzed again, and again, in rapid succession. Gabriel frowned, pulling out his phone to silence it. He glanced at the screen, and his heart stopped. There were dozens of notifications, most of them missed calls and messages from his wife's number. Something was wrong. The first message that caught his eye was from a friend. "Gabriel, you need to see this now." His heart pounded as he clicked the link. It was a video. Initially, he couldn't make it out because of the glare from the courtroom lights, so he stepped into the hallway, searching for a quieter spot. When he finally got a clear view of the screen, his blood ran cold. The video showed a police officer standing over a black woman. It was Monica, his wife. She was lying on the ground, clutching her stomach, struggling to breathe. Gabriel's throat went dry, and his breath caught as he saw Officer Sanders, a white cop, kick her as she fell. The sound of his wife crying out in pain sent an icy chill through his entire body. His mind went blank for a moment, his body frozen in disbelief at what he was seeing. The timestamp on the video showed it had been recorded just hours earlier. The video ended, but Gabriel didn't move. The image replayed in his mind over and over. He knew all too well the dangers black people faced in America. He had been fighting against them for years. He had seen far too many cases of police violence and racial prejudice. But this time, it wasn't another client. This time, it was his wife. His hands trembled as he tried to dial Monica's number. She didn't answer. The phone rang and rang, eventually going to voicemail. Panic overtook him as he tried again. His mind raced. What had happened to her? Was she okay? Where was she? How could this happen to his family? Still in shock, Gabriel's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Monica's friend, Lisa. "Gabriel, are you okay?" Her voice trembled with concern. "Where's my wife?" Gabriel demanded, his voice tight with fear. "Where's Monica? Is she okay?" Lisa hesitated. "She's at the hospital," she said softly. "She's really shaken up, but the baby seems to be okay. They're running some tests." Gabriel closed his eyes, leaning against the wall as a wave of relief washed over him. But almost immediately, it was replaced by a sharp, burning anger. He felt relief that Monica and the baby were alive, but the image of the white officer kicking his pregnant wife burned into his mind. He gripped his phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I'm coming now," Gabriel said, his voice low but firm. He ended the call and immediately messaged his assistant to reschedule the rest of his day. The case he had been preparing for no longer mattered. All he could think about was Monica. As he left the courthouse, the rest of the world seemed to blur around him. He clutched his car keys tightly as he made his way to the parking lot. The drive to the hospital was a haze, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Every red light felt like an eternity, every delay an unbearable weight on his chest. The sound of Monica's cries from the video replayed in his head, relentless and haunting. When he finally arrived at the hospital, he practically ran through the doors, barely stopping to ask for directions to her room. His footsteps echoed in the sterile hallways, each step heavier than the last. When he reached Monica's door, he paused just outside, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He knew he needed to be strong for her. She didn't need to see his anger or fear right now. He stepped into the room, and his heart clenched at the sight of her. Monica lay in the hospital bed, her face pale, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. She looked exhausted, her eyes swollen from crying, but she was alive, and their baby was safe. That was all that mattered to Gabriel in that moment. "Monica," he whispered, rushing to her side and taking her hand. Her fingers tightened around his, and for a moment, they just sat there in silence, drawing comfort from each other's presence. "I'm sorry," Monica said, her voice breaking. I didn't know what to do. He kicked me, Gabriel. I didn't do anything, and he." Her words dissolved into sobs, and Gabriel pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "This is not your fault," he said firmly, even as his own heart shattered. "It's not your fault." He wanted to scream, to break something, to release the burning rage coursing through him, but he couldn't not hear, not now. He had to keep himself calm for Monica. But every second he held her, his mind was consumed with thoughts of the officer, the white cop who had kicked his pregnant wife and left her on the ground as if she didn't matter. Gabriel held Monica tighter. He couldn't let this go. This wasn't just about his family, it was about an entire system that allowed people like Officer Sanders to abuse their power without facing any consequences. It was about every black person who had been brutalized, mistreated, and dehumanized by law enforcement simply because of their skin color. "I'll take care of this," Gabriel promised, his voice low but resolute. "I swear to you, Monica, he's not getting away with this. Not this time." Monica nodded, but the fear in her eyes remained. She knew better than anyone how many times Gabriel had fought for justice in the past. She had witnessed firsthand how the legal system bowed to protect criminals, especially when the perpetrator was white and the victim was black. She knew this fight would be different, tougher, because this time, it was their family that was under threat. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," Gabriel said, gently stroking her hair. "But we'll get through this. I promise you, we'll get through this." They sat like that for a long moment, while Gabriel's mind raced with plans, strategies, and the heavy burden of what lay ahead. He knew exactly who Officer Sanders was. He'd heard his name in hushed complaints among other attorneys. Sanders was one of those officers who always seemed to escape accountability, always just out of reach. But this time, Gabriel wasn't going to let that happen. When the doctors finally came in to perform another round of tests on Monica, Gabriel stepped out of the room, pacing the hallway. He felt as though he was standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering between pain and fury. But one thing was certain, Sanders had no idea who he had just crossed. Gabriel pulled out his phone and started making calls. He wasn't just a lawyer, he had connections, and he was ready to use every one of them to take this officer down. There would be no cover-ups, no escape routes for Sanders this time. Gabriel was crystal clear about his goal. This fight wasn't just for his wife, it was for all the people who had ever been victims of this corrupt system. Justice was coming, and Sanders had no clue. Gabriel sat on the edge of his desk, his mind racing. The video of his wife, Monica, being kicked by Officer Sanders played over and over in his head. He had watched it countless times, but each time he saw her fall to the ground, rage boiled anew within him. This wasn't just another case he was taking on. This was personal. Monica was the love of his life, and their baby, their first child, had been put in danger because of that officer. Gabriel knew this wasn't just about seeking justice for Monica. It was about ensuring that Officer Sanders and the system that protected him paid for what they had done. His phone buzzed again on the desk, another reporter calling. The story was spreading like wildfire. The video had gone viral, and the community was erupting. Protests had already begun outside the police station, with people demanding that Officer Sanders be suspended, arrested something. But the police department was holding its ground. In fact, they had started to claim that Monica wasn't telling the whole story, that she had resisted, and that Sanders had only been doing his duty. Gabriel slammed his phone down on the desk in anger. They were trying to paint his wife as the villain. This was exactly why he had chosen to practice civil rights law, to fight against the lies and excuses they always use to shield people like Sanders. But this time, they had picked the wrong person to go up against. Gabriel opened his laptop and began drafting a new document. He would dig into Officer Sanders' past. There had to be something there. Officers like Sanders didn't suddenly lash out and attack a random black woman without reason. This had to be a pattern of behavior. Gabriel could feel it. The first place he looked was the local court records, and there he found his first lead. Officer Sanders had been sued in 2 separate cases involving excessive use of force. Both cases had been quietly settled out of court with no admission of guilt. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Next, Gabriel looked into internal complaints within the police department. This information wasn't public, but Gabriel had connections. He knew people who could help, and within hours, he had what he needed. There were 5 complaints against Officer Sanders for racism and abuse of power, most of them involving black men. None of the complaints had resulted in discipline. All had been investigated and dismissed. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, rage simmering in his chest. Just as he suspected, this officer had been hurting people for years, and the police department had been covering for him. They had allowed it to happen, and now they were doing it again, this time to his wife. But Gabriel knew this fight wouldn't be easy. The police department had already begun spinning the story in their favor. They were protecting Sanders, as always. Worse, they had started discrediting Monica. They were pushing a narrative that Monica had been aggressive and that Sanders had no choice but to use force. It was all lies, but Gabriel had seen this playbook before. The police department was trying to shift blame to protect itself, framing Monica, a black victim, as the problem. Gabriel couldn't let them do this to Monica. He couldn't let them smear her name when she had done nothing wrong. He picked up his phone and dialed one of his most trusted colleagues, another attorney named Rachel, who had been through countless cases like this. "Rachel, I need your help," Gabriel said as soon as she answered. He didn't waste time on pleasantries, there was no time for that. "I need to build a case against this officer, and I need to do it fast. They've already started destroying Monica's reputation, and I can't let them get away with it." Rachel didn't need convincing. She understood exactly how serious this was. "I'll back you up," she said. "Send me everything you have, and we'll start building the case." Gabriel hung up and exhaled deeply. Now that Rachel was on board, things would start moving. But he knew they were up against a system that had protected people like Officer Sanders for decades. The police department wasn't going to crumble easily, not even under the weight of a viral video. Gabriel had fought these battles for years, and he knew just how hard this was going to be. In the following days, Gabriel and Rachel worked tirelessly. Gabriel meticulously dug into every detail of Officer Sanders' past, uncovering more cases, complaints, and cover-ups. Rachel began reaching out to witnesses who had seen Monica's assault. Most had already uploaded their videos online, but Rachel knew how to turn those recordings into admissible evidence in court. One night, as Gabriel sat in his office, exhausted but resolute, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from someone inside the police department, an officer who disagreed with what was happening but couldn't speak out publicly. The message contained something that stopped Gabriel in his tracks: internal emails from the department. These emails revealed that the police department had been aware of Sanders' history of racist behavior for years. They had covered it up, excused it, and even shielded him when complaints arose. And now, after the attack on Monica, they were scrambling to protect him again. Gabriel read through the emails with a mix of rage and satisfaction. This was the evidence he needed. It proved not only that Officer Sanders was guilty, but that the police department had enabled him. They had protected Sanders, and now they were trying to protect themselves. Gabriel forwarded the emails to Rachel with a short message. "This changes everything. We're bringing them down." The next morning, Gabriel and Rachel formally filed a lawsuit against Officer Sanders and the police department. They weren't just targeting the officer who had assaulted Monica, they were going after the entire system that had allowed him to abuse his power without consequence. It was a bold move, one that would place them in the national spotlight, but Gabriel didn't care. This wasn't about fame or attention. This was about justice. As news of the lawsuit made headlines, the police department scrambled to defend itself. They began leaking information to the media, trying to paint Monica as the aggressor. They claimed that Officer Sanders was merely doing his job and that the situation had been misunderstood. But Gabriel wasn't worried. He had the emails, the evidence, and the truth on his side. The protests outside the police department grew larger and louder. People weren't just outraged about what had happened to Monica, they were furious about a system that continued to allow officers like Sanders to thrive. Gabriel watched the news coverage, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about him or Monica, this was about a fight that had gone on far too long, a fight for justice, accountability, and an end to the violence black people faced every day at the hands of law enforcement. As the trial date approached, Gabriel knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. They had the truth, they had evidence, and they had the support of the people behind them. No matter how hard the police department tried to protect Sanders, Gabriel would make sure justice was served. He glanced over at Monica, who was sitting on the couch, her hand resting lightly on her pregnant belly. She smiled at him, her eyes filled with quiet strength. Gabriel knew this fight wasn't just for her, but for their unborn child, for their family's future, and for all those who had been hurt by a system that refused to see them as equals. The battle had only just begun, but Gabriel was ready. They were ready, and this time, the system would not win. Elsewhere, Officer Sanders leaned back in his chair, watching the local news scroll across the TV screen. Another protest was forming downtown, but he barely paid attention. His phone buzzed on the desk, and with a sigh, he picked it up, expecting it to be one of his colleagues checking in on the latest developments. Instead, his heart stopped for a moment when he saw the notification on the screen. Breaking news: civil rights attorney Gabriel Lopez files lawsuit against Officer Sanders in police brutality case. For a second, he couldn't believe it. But as he opened the article, his stomach sank. His name, his actions, and the face of the woman he had kicked, Monica Lopez, stared back at him from the screen. The story had flooded the news, and worse, her husband was Gabriel Lopez, a name everyone in the city knew. Gabriel Lopez wasn't just any lawyer. He was the lawyer, the one who had taken down corrupt officers before, the one who had fought for justice in some of the most high-profile civil rights cases in the state. And now, he was coming for Sanders. Officer Sanders shot to his feet, his mind racing, his hands shaking. Gabriel Lopez, of all people. He began pacing the small room, trying to calm the rising panic in his chest. It was just a traffic stop, he thought. How was I supposed to know who she was? He swore under his breath, replaying his actions in his mind. He could see it clearly, the way Monica had flinched, her eyes wide with fear as he barked orders at her. The way he had felt a rush of power as he kicked her. It was a scene he had repeated countless times in his career, but this time, he had picked the wrong target. The news segment was brief, but it was enough. His actions were spreading like wildfire on social media, faster than he could comprehend. The article detailed the lawsuit Gabriel had filed, accusing Sanders of unjustly attacking Monica and alleging that his actions were driven by racial bias. Sanders' blood ran cold. Racial bias. Those were the words that could destroy him. If the media and public latched onto that, he was finished. His job, his reputation, everything he had worked for could crumble in an instant. Sanders hastily opened his laptop, typing Gabriel Lopez's name into the search bar. Dozens of articles appeared. There was no escaping it. Images of Gabriel filled the screen. The lawyer's reputation was legendary. He had fought and won against police departments for racial discrimination, police brutality, and wrongful arrests. He spoke eloquently, remained calm under pressure, and knew exactly how to leverage the media to his advantage. Worst of all, he never gave up. For the first time in his career, Sanders felt the walls closing in. Sanders clicked on a video interview featuring Gabriel outside the courthouse. Gabriel's calm yet resolute voice echoed through the room. "This case isn't just about my wife," Gabriel said, staring directly into the camera. "This is about a system that has allowed officers like Sanders to act without accountability. This is about responsibility and ending the cycle of violence and discrimination against Black Americans at the hands of those who are supposed to protect them." A chill ran down Sanders' spine. This was no longer about a single incident. Gabriel was painting him as part of a broken, racist system, and Gabriel had the voice, the platform, and the connections to ensure that everyone in the city, even the country, knew it. Sanders was no longer just a cop under scrutiny. He had become a symbol of everything wrong with law enforcement, and Gabriel was going to use him to send a message. Sanders' phone buzzed again, this time with a text from a superior. The message was short and to the point. "We need to talk." His heart pounded. They were all scared now. They knew the lawsuit could bring more scrutiny than they were prepared to handle, and if this situation escalated further, someone would have to take the fall as scapegoat. "Damn it," Sanders muttered, slamming his hand on the desk, spilling his coffee. He wiped it up with a napkin, his mind racing. He needed an escape route, but his options were limited. The media had latched onto the story, and Gabriel Lopez was a formidable opponent. This wasn't something he could simply sweep under the rug like previous complaints he'd faced. This was different. He had kicked a pregnant woman in broad daylight, and now her husband was coming after him. In desperation, Sanders picked up the phone and called one of his friends on the force, Sergeant Martinez. "Martinez, have you seen the news?" There was a pause on the other end before Martinez's gruff voice responded. "Yeah, I've seen it. This is bad, really bad. What do I do?" Sanders' voice cracked, reflecting the fear overtaking him. Martinez sighed. "There's not much you can do, man. It's Gabriel Lopez. That guy's a shark. I've heard he's gathering evidence, talking to witnesses, pulling every string he can. You better brace yourself. This is about to get ugly." Sanders clenched his jaw, his mind spinning. He knew Martinez was right. Gabriel was building a case, and with each passing day, more people were joining in, demanding justice for Monica. The protests outside the police station were growing, with signs reading, "Justice for Monica," and "End Racism in Policing." The pressure was mounting, and Sanders had no idea how to stop it. But one thing he knew for certain, Gabriel Lopez wouldn't stop until he was taken down. And if he didn't come up with a plan soon, his career and possibly his freedom would be on the line. Sanders sank into his chair, staring at the floor. How had things spiraled out of control so quickly? One moment, he had held all the power, and now he was at the center of a media firestorm, his name dragged through the mud everywhere. He needed to talk to his lawyer, figure out his options. Maybe he could spin the narrative in his favor. After all, he wasn't the only one responsible for this. The police department had let it happen, had covered for him before. Why should this time be any different? His thoughts were interrupted by another notification on his phone. This time, the headline made his heart race. Breaking, Gabriel Lopez to hold press conference tomorrow, revealing critical evidence. Evidence? Sanders muttered, his mouth dry. What could Gabriel have? What did he know? The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about what had happened on that street corner. Gabriel had the resources, the connections, and the determination to dig into every corner of his past. If Gabriel could prove this wasn't a one-time mistake, that Sanders had a history of racism and misconduct, the lawsuit would only be the beginning. His life would be over. Sanders frantically scrolled through his phone, searching for any clue about what Gabriel had uncovered, but there was nothing concrete yet, only speculation and rumors. But the press conference was looming, and with every passing hour, Sanders felt the walls closing in around him. As the night wore on, he exhausted every scenario he could think of. There was no way out. Gabriel Lopez wasn't just fighting for his wife, he was coming after Sanders personally, and the worst part was, deep down, Sanders knew he deserved it. He had crossed a line, and now he was going to pay the price. The next morning, Sanders was woken by his phone ringing. This time, it was his lawyer, calling to discuss the press conference. Sanders answered, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew the truth would come out one way or another. He had kicked a pregnant woman, a black woman, simply because he thought he could, and now he was about to face the consequences. Gabriel Lopez wasn't just any husband. He was a man who fought for justice, and this time, justice had a name: Monica. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with tension, every seat occupied. People leaned forward in their chairs, eyes fixed on the front, waiting to see what would happen next. Monica sat beside Gabriel, her hand resting on her rounded belly, a reminder to everyone of her vulnerability when the attack had occurred. Officer Sanders sat just a few meters away, his expression tense but unreadable. He had traded his uniform for a suit, but nothing could mask the fear in his eyes. He knew he had everything to lose. The trial had captured national attention. Cameras flashed outside, and reporters filled the courtroom, ready to document every word. The case had become bigger than the attack on Monica. It was now about racial injustice, police violence, and a system that had allowed people like Sanders to evade accountability for far too long. When the judge called for order, the room fell into a tense silence. Gabriel rose from his seat, adjusted his tie, and walked slowly to the front of the courtroom. Each step was deliberate, his face calm and focused, but inside, he was seething with anger and determination. This was no longer just another case for him, this was personal. He was fighting for his wife, their unborn child, and every black person who had ever been mistreated by someone like Sanders. The jurors watched Gabriel intently. They had already heard Monica testify earlier in the week. Her voice had trembled as she recounted the night Officer Sanders kicked her, describing the pain, fear, and humiliation she had felt. Everyone in the room knew this wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate act of violence. Monica's tears had left a deep impression on the jury. But now, it was Gabriel's turn to deliver his closing argument, and he knew this was the moment to make them see the truth. He paused for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air before he began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he started, his voice steady. "What happened to my wife, Monica, was not just an act of violence. It was an act of hatred, the product of a system that has allowed people like Officer Sanders to believe they can treat black people with cruelty and never be held accountable." His words echoed through the room, causing the jurors to sit up straighter, paying even closer attention. Gabriel stepped closer to them, his voice growing more passionate but remaining composed. "This case is not just about Monica, it's about every black man, woman, and child who has ever feared those who were supposed to protect them. It's about a history of racial injustice, about people in positions of power who think they can act however they please simply because they wear a badge." The jurors exchanged glances, feeling the weight of Gabriel's words. They were beginning to understand that this case wasn't just about Monica's attack. It was about justice, accountability, and fixing the wrongs of a system that had shielded people like Sanders for far too long. Gabriel didn't give them a chance to look away. He pressed on, his voice filled with conviction. Officer Sanders didn't kick Monica because she hesitated to step out of the car. He kicked her because of how she looked. He saw a black woman and thought he could treat her however he wanted. He thought no one would care. But today, you have the power to show him and the world that you care, that what he did was wrong, and that justice will be served. He let his words linger in the silence that enveloped the room. The jury was captivated. Gabriel had struck a nerve. At the back of the courtroom, reporters scribbled furiously, trying to capture every word. The tension in the room was palpable, and even those watching live from home could feel it. Gabriel had built his argument carefully, leaving just enough suspense without revealing everything too soon. Each sentence made the jury want to hear more, to understand the full picture before making their final decision. He glanced at Monica, her eyes filled with both pride and fear. She had trusted him to seek justice for what had happened to her, and he would not let her down. Turning back to the jury, Gabriel prepared to deliver the final piece of his argument. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This," he said, holding it up for the jury to see, "is Officer Sanders' disciplinary record. A record filled with complaints from other black citizens, each one describing how he abused his power to intimidate, bully, and yes, even harm." A murmur rippled through the room as Gabriel unfolded the paper and began to read. "Here's one complaint. Officer Sanders pulled me over for no reason, called me racial slurs, and threatened to arrest me if I didn't comply. Here's another. I was walking home when Officer Sanders stopped me, shoved me against a wall, and searched me without cause." The expressions on the jurors' faces shifted. What they had initially thought was an isolated incident now appeared to be part of a larger, more troubling pattern. Gabriel could see them piecing it together, realizing that this case wasn't just about what had happened to Monica. It was about a man who had abused his power for years and a system that had allowed him to do so. As Gabriel continued, the gravity of his argument was undeniable. This system failed Monica, just as it failed every person who ever filed a complaint, he said. But today, you have the power to change that. You have the power to send a message that we will no longer tolerate racism, hatred, or violence in our police force. That no matter who you are, no matter the color of your skin, you deserve to be treated with fairness and respect. Gabriel looked at each member of the jury, ensuring they felt the weight of the responsibility resting on their shoulders. "I know this is a heavy burden," he said gently, his voice full of empathy. "But you have the opportunity to do what's right, to stand up for Monica and for all black people who have suffered at the hands of individuals like Officer Sanders. You can be the change." The room was silent. Even Officer Sanders, who had spent most of the trial with a smug expression, now appeared uneasy. His lawyer fidgeted nervously, clearly aware that Gabriel's argument had been powerfully compelling. Gabriel stepped back, letting his final words linger in the air. "Justice is not just a word we say lightly. It is something we must fight to uphold. And today, I urge you to deliver justice for Monica, for our child, and for all those who deserve better treatment from those sworn to protect us." With that, he returned to his seat beside Monica. She squeezed his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. She knew he had done everything he could. The judge instructed the jury and, as they left the room to deliberate, the tension in the courtroom escalated. Everyone understood that the decision they were about to make extended far beyond this case. It was about accountability, justice, and setting a precedent that officers could not hide behind their badges when acting out of hatred. Hours passed, and when the jury returned, the entire room held its breath. The judge addressed the foreperson. "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood and nodded. "Your Honor, we have. We find the defendant, Officer Sanders, guilty of assault and misconduct." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Monica cried silently in Gabriel's arms while members of the community behind her erupted in cheers of victory. Justice had been served, but it had been a hard-fought battle. As the verdict was read aloud, it became clear that something fundamental had shifted in the courtroom. This was not just about punishing one bad officer, it was the beginning of dismantling a system that had allowed people like him to exist. It was about hope, change, and justice finally reaching those who deserved it most. For Gabriel, the fight was not yet over, but for now, he had won the most important battle of his life. The courtroom was tense as everyone settled into their seats. The air seemed electric, thick with anticipation. Gabriel Lopez sat in the front row, his heart pounding, knowing that today could change everything. He looked at his wife, Monica, seated beside him, her eyes filled with fear but also unwavering determination. This was Judgment Day, and everyone in the room knew that this case was more than just a trial. It was about justice, hope, and the long fight against systemic racism. The judge entered the room, and a hush fell over the crowd. Monica gripped Gabriel's hand tightly, seeking comfort. They had endured so much together, and now they stood on the brink of a moment that could shape their lives and the future of their community. Gabriel glanced around the courtroom, taking in the faces of friends, family, and supporters who had come to stand by them. There were signs of encouragement reading, "Justice for Monica," and "We stand together." The community's presence gave them strength, but the weight of the moment remained immense. As the judge began to speak, Gabriel's thoughts raced back to the fateful day when Officer Sanders kicked Monica. He remembered the pain on her face, the terror in her eyes, and his own feeling of helplessness. He had spent his life fighting for justice, but nothing could have prepared him for the heartbreak of seeing his wife suffer at the hands of someone who was supposed to protect them. And now, here they were, ready to confront a system that had failed them for too long. The judge's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We have reached the conclusion of this case. The jury has deliberated, and I will now read their verdict." The room fell silent. Gabriel held his breath, and Monica stared straight ahead, her expression resolute. Both were afraid, but neither would back down. For the charge of assault against Monica Lopez, we find the defendant, Officer Sanders, guilty. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Whispers and cheers erupted as supporters celebrated the victory. Tears filled Monica's eyes, but this time, they were tears of relief. She turned to Gabriel and hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of his embrace and the support of the community surrounding them. But before they could fully celebrate, the judge continued. "Officer Sanders, you are also found guilty of misconduct and will be sentenced at a later date." The weight of these words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. While the guilty verdict was a victory, the fight was not entirely over. Sanders sat there, his face pale, stripped of the arrogance he had displayed throughout the trial. The reality of the situation began to sink in, and it was clear he had not anticipated this outcome. The courtroom was a whirlwind of emotions as Gabriel processed a mix of triumph and lingering anger, fully aware of the deep wounds Officer Sanders' actions had inflicted not just on Monica but on their entire community. The air was thick with the weight of the verdict, and Gabriel paused to take it all in. He looked at Monica, who still clutched his hand tightly. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We really did it." Cheers erupted around them, and the judge struck the gavel to restore order. "I will schedule sentencing soon. Court is adjourned." The crowd began to disperse, people hugging and celebrating, but Gabriel and Monica remained seated for a moment longer, holding on to each other as they processed the flood of emotions coursing through them. When they finally stepped out of the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters swarmed them, microphones thrust forward, eager to capture the moment. Gabriel felt the weight of the crowd's gaze, momentarily overwhelmed by the attention. But this wasn't about him, this was about Monica and the message they had fought so hard to deliver. "Mr. Lopez, Mrs. Lopez, how do you feel about the verdict?" a reporter called out, pushing forward. Gabriel cleared his throat, knowing this was their opportunity to speak. "We are deeply grateful for the jury's decision," he began, his voice steady. "But this is only the beginning. We have a long road ahead in the fight against systemic racism and police violence." He glanced at Monica, who nodded in agreement. "This isn't just about one officer," she said, her voice strong. "This is about everyone who has ever suffered at the hands of those sworn to protect them. We hope this verdict is a step toward meaningful change." The crowd erupted in cheers once more, their support ringing through the air as Gabriel and Monica made their way through. They felt a newfound sense of purpose, knowing they had ignited a flame within their community. As they reached their car, Monica turned to Gabriel and asked, "What happens next?" "We wait for sentencing, and then we keep fighting," he replied. "We'll continue raising awareness, pushing for reform, and ensuring this never happens again." Driving home, they both felt a wave of relief wash over them, though they knew the fight wasn't over. There were still so many who needed help and advocacy, and they were committed to being the voice for those who felt unheard. In the weeks that followed, the community rallied together, organizing events and meetings to discuss police reform and racial equality. Monica and Gabriel were at the forefront, sharing their story and inspiring others to stand up against injustice. Local news outlets covered their journey extensively, drawing widespread attention and sparking a movement that reached far beyond their small town. As Sanders' sentencing day approached, tension hung in the air. Many in the community anxiously awaited the decision, wondering if he would receive a light slap on the wrist or face real consequences for his actions. Gabriel and Monica understood the weight of the sentencing. It would set a precedent, and they hoped it would reflect the gravity of the situation. Finally, the day arrived. The courtroom was packed with supporters, activists, and community members eager to witness Sanders' fate. Monica's face was set with determination, and Gabriel stood by her side, drawing strength from their shared resolve as the judge entered the room. The atmosphere was tense. Sanders sat alongside his lawyer, his expression reflecting the gravity of the moment. Gabriel could see the nervousness in Sanders' eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that the man who had caused so much pain was finally facing the consequences. The judge cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Officer Sanders," the judge began. "You stand before this court convicted of assault and misconduct. Your actions on that day were not only a violation of the law but a betrayal of the trust this community placed in you." The judge paused, looking around the room. "It is the opinion of this court that a message must be sent that such behavior will not be tolerated." He continued. "Given the severity of your actions and the impact they have had on Monica Lopez and her family, I sentence you to 3 years in prison." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, followed by murmurs of astonishment. But Monica felt a wave of relief wash over her. Justice had been served, and the community's message had been heard loud and clear. As the judge struck the gavel, Gabriel turned to Monica, who was crying tears of joy. "We did it," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We really did it." Even in this moment of victory, Gabriel knew the fight wasn't over. This sentence was only one battle in a much larger war against racial injustice. He and Monica had made a difference, but there was still so much work to be done. In the weeks that followed, Monica and Gabriel dove even deeper into community organizing. They spoke at schools, churches, and local events, sharing their story and inspiring others to take action. They called for changes in police training, accountability measures, and community engagement, determined to ensure that what happened to Monica would never happen again. While continuing this work, they also turned their focus inward, preparing for their growing family. Monica's pregnancy progressed well, filling them both with joy and a renewed sense of purpose. The couple began preparing for their baby's arrival, envisioning a future where their child would grow up in a stronger, more united community. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, Gabriel turned to Monica. "I want our child to grow up proud of who they are," he said softly. "I want them to know they come from a legacy of strength and resilience." Monica smiled, resting her hand on her belly. And I want to teach them to stand up for what's right, just like we did. No matter what challenges they face, they'll know they're never alone. As they prepared for bed, both felt a sense of hope for the future. They knew the journey ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face it together, united by their love and their shared commitment to justice. The fight against racial injustice and inequality would continue, but with every step, they were making a difference not just for themselves but for countless others. And as they awaited the arrival of their child, they knew they were laying the foundation for a brighter, fairer future. In the end, Monica and Gabriel became unwavering advocates for change, driven by their love for each other and their relentless determination to fight for justice. They were not just parents, they were leaders in their community, ensuring their child would grow up in a world where love, acceptance, and equality reigned. And so, their story continued, a testament to the power of resilience, the strength of community, and the enduring hope for a better tomorrow. The story of Monica and Gabriel teaches us the importance of resilience and standing up for justice in the face of adversity. Monica's strength and Gabriel's relentless determination show that love and unity can fuel meaningful change. Their journey reminds us to confront injustice head-on, support those who suffer, and work toward a fairer society. The power of community, combined with unwavering courage, can challenge